The desert sun was setting over Arizona when the first alien ship broke through the clouds. Sergeant Jake saw it before anyone else in his squad. He was scanning the horizon with his binoculars when a shadow fell across the sand. He looked up and felt his heart stop. The ship was massive. It was black and shaped like a curved blade at least half a mile long. It made no sound as it descended, which somehow made it even more terrifying. Jake had served in the military for 8 years. He had seen combat in 3 different countries, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. "What the hell is that?" Private whispered beside him. Jake did not answer. He could not answer. His mouth had gone completely dry. He watched as the ship landed about 2 miles away, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and sand. The ground shook beneath his boots. Within minutes, his radio exploded with chatter. Command was screaming for information. Other units were reporting similar ships landing across the globe. Jake counted at least 6 more objects in the sky above them, circling like vultures. "What do you see?" Captain's voice crackled through the radio. Jake raised his binoculars again. A ramp was lowering from the belly of the ship. Figures were walking down it. They were tall, much taller than any human. Even from this distance, he could see they were not human at all. "Contact," Jake said into his radio. His voice was steadier than he felt. "Unknown hostiles, at least 50 of them there. They're not human, sir." There was silence on the radio for a long moment. Then's voice came back tight and controlled. "Hold your position. Do not engage. Reinforcements are on the way." Jake lowered his binoculars and looked at his squad. There were 12 of them, all young, all scared. Was gripping her M4 rifle so hard her knuckles had turned white. Corporal Austin was praying quietly under his breath. The others just stared at the distant ship with wide eyes. "You heard the captain," Jake said. "We hold here. Nobody does anything stupid." But holding their position became impossible 30 minutes later when one of the alien vehicles approached their location. It floated above the sand without wheels or tracks, humming with a strange energy. Jake ordered his squad to take cover behind a rocky outcropping, but the vehicle stopped directly in front of them. A door opened, and 3 aliens stepped out. Jake had never seen anything like them. They stood at least 8 feet tall. Their skin was covered in shimmering scales that changed color in the fading sunlight. They had 4 arms each, and their faces were a nightmare of mandibles and compound eyes. They wore armor that glowed with a faint blue light. The largest one stepped forward. It carried a weapon that looked like a rifle, but sleeker and more advanced than anything Jake had ever seen. A small device on its chest blinked, and then it spoke in perfect English. "Humans," it said. The voice was cold and mechanical. "I am commander of the Dominion. Your world is now under our authority. You will surrender your weapons and come with us." Jake stepped forward, his M4 raised. "I don't think so. This is United States territory. You need to leave." Made a clicking sound with his mandibles. It took Jake a moment to realize the alien was laughing. "You threaten me?" asked. He seemed genuinely amused. "With that primitive tool?" Before Jake could react, moved with impossible speed. One of his 4 arms shot out and knocked the rifle from Jake's hands. The M4 flew through the air and landed in the sand at its feet. The alien commander picked it up and examined it. He turned it over in his clawed hands, studying it like a curious child examining a toy. "This is your weapon?" asked. "A metal tube that throws small pieces of metal. This is what defends your world." Jake said nothing. His heart was pounding in his chest. Aimed the M4 at a nearby rock and pulled the trigger. The rifle fired 3 rounds in quick succession. The bullets struck the rock and broke off small chips of stone. "Kinetic projectiles," said dismissively. He dropped the rifle in the sand. "Our shields are designed to stop kinetic energy. Your weapons cannot harm us." To demonstrate, turned to one of his soldiers and spoke in a harsh, clicking language. The soldier nodded and raised its own weapon. A beam of brilliant blue plasma shot from the barrel and struck a boulder 20 feet away. The boulder exploded into molten fragments. "That is a weapon," said. "What you have is a children's toy." He stepped closer to Jake, towering over the human sergeant. Jake could smell something chemical and sharp, like burning metal. "Your species has 48 hours to surrender," said. "All of your governments will receive this message. If you do not surrender, we will destroy your cities one by one until you comply. We have conquered 17 species across 3 star systems. None have successfully resisted us. You will not be the first." Jake looked into those alien eyes and saw nothing but cold certainty, truly believed what he was saying. To him, this was not a threat. It was simply a statement of fact. "We've been fighting wars for thousands of years," Jake said quietly. "We don't surrender easy." Made that clicking laugh again. "Your wars were fought with sticks and stones and these pathetic metal tubes. You have never faced a real enemy." He gestured to his soldiers. "We are leaving now. 48 hours. Tell your leaders." The aliens returned to their vehicle and floated away toward their ship. Jake watched them go, his hands shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. Approached him and handed back his rifle. "Sarge, what do we do?" Jake checked his weapon, brushing off the sand. The M4 felt solid and familiar in his hands. It was not a plasma rifle. It was not an energy weapon. It was just steel and springs and ammunition. But it was his. "We report back to command," he said, "and then we figure out how to kill these things." Looked at him with uncertainty. "You heard him. Their shields stop bullets." Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, I heard him, but he only fired 3 rounds. Let's see what happens when we fire 300. He looked up at the alien ship in the distance. The sun had fully set now, and the ship's lights glowed against the dark sky like an evil star. 48 hours. That was not much time, but Jake had a feeling that the aliens had made a serious mistake. They had studied human weapons, but they had not studied humans. They did not understand that humanity had spent its entire existence finding new and creative ways to kill things. The Dominion was about to learn a very hard lesson. The United Nations Emergency Session was the largest gathering of world leaders in human history. Every president, prime minister, and military commander who could reach New York had come. The rest attended through video screens that lined the walls of the assembly hall. General Cooper stood at the back of the room, watching the chaos unfold. He was 62 years old and had served in the military for his entire adult life. He had seen wars, disasters, and political crises, but he had never seen anything like the fear in this room. The ambassador stood at the center of the hall. His name was, and he was slightly smaller than Commander but no less intimidating. He had come to deliver his people's terms. "Your world has resources we require," said through his translator device. "Minerals, water, biological samples. You will provide these things, and in exchange, we will allow your species to continue existing." The Secretary General, a tired-looking woman named Vance, leaned forward. "And if we refuse?" Made the clicking sound that passed for laughter. "Allow me to demonstrate the futility of resistance." He gestured to 2 soldiers standing nearby. One of them activated a device on his wrist, and a shimmering blue field appeared around his body. The other soldier raised a human handgun that had been confiscated from a security guard. "This is your most common personal weapon," said. "Watch carefully." The soldier fired the handgun at his companion. The bullet struck the blue shield and simply stopped. It hung in the air for a moment, suspended in the energy field, then dropped harmlessly to the floor. "Kinetic energy absorption," explained. "Our shields convert the force of your projectiles into harmless heat. Your weapons are useless against us." He then gestured to a thick steel wall that had been set up for the demonstration. The wall was 3 feet thick, reinforced with the strongest alloys humanity could produce. "This represents your best defensive technology," said. The second soldier raised a plasma rifle and fired a single shot. The beam of superheated plasma burned through the steel wall like it was made of paper. The metal glowed red, then white, then simply ceased to exist. A perfectly circular hole remained, smoke rising from its edges. The room fell silent, watched the faces of the world leaders. He saw defeat in their eyes. They were already giving up. "You have 36 hours remaining," said. "Use them wisely." The delegation left the building, and the room exploded into panicked discussion. Some leaders argued for immediate surrender. Others demanded nuclear strikes against the alien ships. A few simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process what they had witnessed. Slipped out of the room and made a phone call. 6 hours later, he was in a secret military facility in the Nevada desert. The building had no official name and did not appear on any map. Inside, a team of scientists and military experts had gathered around a large table covered with equipment and computer screens. "Tell me what we know," said. Lieutenant Colonel Torres stepped forward. She was the facility's chief weapons analyst, a brilliant woman who had spent her career studying how things broke. "The alien shields work on a simple principle," she said, pulling up a diagram on a screen. "They absorb kinetic energy and disperse it as heat. A single bullet doesn't have enough force to overload the system." "So our weapons really are useless," said another officer, a young man named Lieutenant Chris Parker. Shook her head. "I didn't say that. The demonstration used a 9mm handgun, single shots, low velocity, low mass." She pulled up another diagram. "But look at their shield technology more closely. It needs time to disperse each impact, approximately 0.3 seconds between hits to fully reset." Leaned forward. "What happens if we don't give it that time?" Smiled. It was the first smile had seen all day. "That's the question, isn't it? The M4 carbine fires between 700 and 900 rounds per minute. That's roughly 14 rounds per second. Each round travels at over 2,000 feet per second and carries significantly more energy than a handgun bullet." She typed commands into her computer, and a simulation appeared on the screen. "If we concentrate sustained rifle fire on a single target, the shield has to absorb multiple impacts before it can disperse the first one. The energy builds up faster than the shield can release it." "You're saying we can overload the shields," said. "I'm saying it's theoretically possible. We need to test it." Nodded and turned to another officer. "Do we have any captured technology?" "One shield generator," the officer replied. "Recovered from a scout that crashed in Brazil. It's damaged, but we managed to get it partially working." "Then let's test the theory." They set up the experiment in an underground firing range. The damaged shield generator was mounted on a metal frame, its blue energy field flickering weakly. A squad of soldiers stood 30 feet away, their M4 rifles loaded and ready. "Single shot first," instructed. One soldier fired. The bullet struck the shield, stopped, and dropped to the floor, just like the demonstration. "Now sustained fire, everyone at once. Don't stop until I say." 8 soldiers opened fire simultaneously. The roar of the rifles was deafening in the enclosed space. Brass casings flew through the air. The blue shield flared brightly as it absorbed impact after impact. For 3 seconds nothing happened. The shield held. Then the blue light began to flicker. The flares became irregular, stuttering, held his breath. At 5 seconds, the shield collapsed entirely. The bullets that had been stopped in midair suddenly flew forward and slammed into the metal frame behind the generator. The frame fell over with a loud crash. "Cease fire," shouted. The soldiers stopped. Silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of hot brass casings cooling on the floor. Stared at the destroyed shield generator. Then he looked at. How long can their shields last under sustained fire from multiple rifles? Checked her calculations. Based on this test, A standard personal shield should fail in 3 to 5 seconds under concentrated fire from 8 or more M4 rifles. More rifles, faster failure. Felt something he had not felt since the alien ships first appeared. Hope. "Get me a secure line to every military commander on the planet," he said. "We have work to do and not much time to do it." He looked at the fallen shield generator one more time. The aliens had conquered 17 species with their superior technology, but they had made one critical error. They had assumed that primitive meant harmless. They had tested human weapons, but they had not tested human determination. That mistake was going to cost them everything. The 48 hours passed, and humanity did not surrender. They were surprised, but not concerned. Primitive species often needed to learn their lesson the hard way. Commander was more than happy to teach them. The invasion began at dawn on the third day, descended from orbit, carrying thousands of soldiers to strategic locations around the world. Their plan was simple and well-tested. They would capture the capital cities first, kill any humans who resisted, and force the survivors into labor camps. It had worked on 17 other worlds. Personally led the assault on North America. His column of 3,000 soldiers would march through the Utah desert, destroying any military installations in their path, and then move on to the population centers. He expected to reach Salt Lake City by nightfall. The humans had prepared a different schedule. Jake had not slept in 2 days. He and his squad had been deployed to a place called Red Canyon, a narrow valley surrounded by high cliffs of red stone. It was not an important location. There were no cities nearby, no military bases, nothing of strategic value. That was exactly why they had chosen it. Captain had briefed them on the plan. It was insane, but it was also their only chance. "The aliens are arrogant," had explained. "They've never faced a real fight. They march in tight formations because they've never needed to worry about ambushes. Their scouts are lazy because their shields make them feel invincible." He had unfolded a map of Red Canyon. "We're going to change that." Now Jake lay on his stomach on a rocky ledge looking down at the canyon floor below. Was beside him, her rifle steady in her hands. Austin was 20 feet to his left. Across the canyon on the opposite cliff, he could see more soldiers taking position. 200 in total, hidden among the rocks, invisible from below. Each soldier carried an M4 rifle with 12 magazines of armor-piercing ammunition. 3,600 rounds per person, enough to rain hell on anything below. Jake checked his watch. The column should arrive within the hour. He felt his heart beating hard in his chest, but his hands were steady. Fear was natural. Letting fear control you was not. "You scared?" asked quietly. "Terrified," Jake admitted. "You?" "Same." She adjusted her rifle's position. "But I've seen what these things do to people who surrender. Saw the footage from Brazil. Rather die fighting." Jake nodded. He had seen the footage too. They did not treat prisoners kindly. An hour later, the first soldiers appeared at the entrance to the canyon. They marched in neat rows of 20, their armor gleaming in the morning sun. They moved with the confidence of conquerors, barely bothering to look at their surroundings. Their plasma rifles hung casually at their sides. A few were engaged in conversation, their clicking language echoing off the canyon walls. Jake counted them as they entered. 100, 200, 500. The column stretched back as far as he could see. And at the front, unmistakable with his towering height and ornate armor, was Commander. Jake felt a cold rage settle into his bones. That alien had called his weapon a toy, had laughed at humanity's chances, had promised to destroy everything Jake had ever known. "All units hold fire," his voice crackled through Jake's earpiece. "Wait until the main force is fully in the canyon. We get one chance at this." The minutes crawled by. More and more soldiers entered the canyon. 1,000, 2,000. They were packing themselves into the narrow valley, unable to see the trap that surrounded them. Finally reached the center of the canyon. He stopped and looked around, perhaps sensing something wrong. The canyon was too quiet. There were no birds, no animals, nothing but the sound of marching feet. Now said, 200 rifles opened fire at once. The sound was like thunder trapped between the canyon walls, a continuous roar that shook the very rocks. Jake squeezed his trigger and held it down, pouring rounds into the alien formation below. Beside him was doing the same. Across the canyon, every soldier was firing, creating a crossfire of death from which there was no escape. The shields activated instantly. Blue light flared across the canyon as thousands of energy fields tried to absorb the incoming rounds. For one terrible second, Jake thought the shields would hold. Then they began to fail. The shields were designed to stop single impacts. They were not designed for this. They were not designed for dozens of bullets hitting them every second, from every direction without pause. The energy built up faster than it could be dispersed. The shields flickered, stuttered, and then collapsed entirely. The aliens had never experienced anything like this. Their confident march turned into chaos. Soldiers fell as bullets found flesh. Some tried to fire back with their plasma rifles, but they could not find targets among the rocks above. Others tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The canyon walls trapped them just as Jake's commanders had planned. Jake kept firing magazine after magazine. His shoulder ached from the recoil. His ears rang despite the protection. Spent casings piled up around his position. He did not stop. He could not stop. Every bullet was revenge for every human that had killed. Tried to rally his troops. He stood in the center of the massacre, shouting orders, firing his plasma rifle at the cliff faces. His personal shield was stronger than the standard soldiers, but even it could not hold forever. Jake watched as the blue light around the commander grew brighter and brighter, absorbing hit after hit. "Concentrate fire on the commander," Jake shouted into his radio. "Everyone hit the big one." A dozen soldiers shifted their aim. 50 rifles focused on a single target. Shield blazed like a small sun, struggling to contain the overwhelming force. 3 seconds passed, then 5, then 7. The shield shattered, staggered as the first bullet struck his armor. He looked up at the cliffs with an expression Jake could not read. Surprise, perhaps, or disbelief. Austin's shot caught in the chest. The alien commander fell to his knees. Another burst hit his shoulder, then his head. Commander of the Dominion, conqueror of 17 worlds, collapsed face first into the red dust of Earth. The battle lasted 11 more minutes. When it ended, the canyon floor was covered with alien bodies. 3,000 soldiers, the pride of the invasion force, lay dead among the rocks they had marched through so confidently. Human casualties were 12 wounded and 0 dead. Jake lowered his rifle and looked at the destruction below. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off. Sat beside him, tears streaming down her face, though Jake was not sure if they were from grief or relief or simple exhaustion. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." Jake nodded slowly. They had proven that the aliens could be killed, that their shields could be broken, that their confidence was nothing but arrogance. But this was just one battle. They still had ships in orbit. They still had armies around the world. The war was far from over. Jake reloaded his rifle and stood up. His body ached, but his spirit was stronger than it had been in days. "Let's move," he said. "There's more of them out there." The others followed him down from the cliffs, stepping carefully over the alien bodies. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting harsh light on the scene of humanity's first real victory. The galaxy was watching, and humanity had just sent a very clear message. The news of Red Canyon spread across Earth in hours. Governments that had been preparing surrender documents suddenly stopped writing. Military forces that had been hiding in bunkers emerged with renewed purpose. Humanity had been given something it desperately needed: hope. In the command ship orbiting Earth, the reaction was very different. Fleet Commander received the battle report with disbelief. She read it 3 times, certain there was some mistake. 3,000 soldiers dead, Commander killed, and the attackers had been a mere 200 humans with their primitive metal tubes. How is this possible? She demanded of her senior officers. Their weapons cannot penetrate our shields. Senior tactician pulled up the sensor data from his column. The readings showed what had happened, but he struggled to explain it. Their rate of fire, he said slowly. It exceeds anything we've encountered before. They don't shoot once and wait. They pour continuous streams of projectiles into single targets. Our shields cannot regenerate fast enough to compensate. Stared at the data. The concept was so simple, so obvious, yet no species had ever thought to use it against them. They had conquered races with energy weapons, with chemical weapons, with sonic weapons. All of those could be defended against with the right shield frequencies. But the humans used the most basic form of attack imaginable, throwing metal at high speed, and they had figured out how to make it work. Adjust our tactics, ordered. From now on, our forces do not engage in open terrain. We attack from vehicles, from the air, from fortified positions. We do not give them targets to concentrate on. But implementing new tactics in the middle of an invasion was not easy. They had trained for centuries to fight in a certain way. Changing now meant confusion, delays, and mistakes. Meanwhile, humanity was adapting too, and humans adapted faster. General Cooper established a new war doctrine within days of Red Canyon. Every military unit in the world received the same instructions: coordinated fire, continuous pressure, overwhelming numbers. Soldiers trained in new formations designed to maximize the number of rifles hitting a single target. Ammunition factories worked around the clock to produce the specialized armor-piercing rounds that performed best against shields. And then the engineers got creative. At a military research facility in Texas, a team led by Dr. Vega mounted 6 M4 rifles on a motorized turret. The guns were linked to a single trigger mechanism and an advanced targeting computer. When a soldier was detected, all 6 rifles would fire simultaneously, pouring over 80 rounds per second into the target. They called it the Shredder. The first Shredder units were deployed in the defense of Houston. An assault force of 500 soldiers advanced on the city from the south, expecting the usual human resistance: scattered, uncoordinated, easily crushed. They found 30 Shredders positioned along a highway overpass. The battle lasted 4 minutes. The shields collapsed almost instantly under the concentrated fire. By the time the alien commander ordered a retreat, 300 of his soldiers were dead. Other innovations followed. Drones were fitted with lighter weapons and programmed to fly in coordinated swarms, each drone targeting a different section of a single shield. Vehicles were armored with reactive plates that could survive a few plasma hits, giving them time to close distance and unleash devastating fire. Snipers learned to work in teams of 4, timing their shots to hit the same target within milliseconds of each other. They began to lose ground. In Europe, a combined force of French, German, and British troops drove the aliens out of Paris after a week of brutal street fighting. In Asia, Chinese and Japanese forces developed a tactic of luring columns into narrow urban streets where their numbers meant nothing. In Africa, Nigerian and South African soldiers became experts at night attacks, using the darkness to approach close enough that even short bursts could overload shields. Jake's unit was transferred from Red Canyon to the front lines in Colorado. The aliens had established a major base near Denver, and American forces were preparing to take it back. Jake had become something of a legend since Red Canyon. Other soldiers called him the one who killed, though Austin had actually fired the fatal shot. Jake did not care about credit. He cared about winning. The Denver assault was planned for midnight. 15,000 human soldiers against approximately 8,000 defenders. The aliens had fortified their position with energy barriers and heavy weapons, but they had made one critical mistake. They had not prepared for an enemy that knew their weakness. Jake's squad was assigned to the western approach. Their job was to punch through the outer defenses and draw attention away from the main assault force. It was dangerous work. Half of them might not survive. "Remember the rules," Captain told them before they moved out. "Stay together, concentrate fire, don't let them fight you one-on-one." They moved through the darkness, 70 soldiers creeping through abandoned suburbs toward the alien perimeter, walked beside Jake, her rifle ready. Austin was on his other side. They had become a tight unit since Red Canyon, bound by the shared experience of impossible survival. The first patrol appeared at the edge of their night vision. 4 aliens walking in a loose formation, clearly not expecting attack. Jake raised his fist, signaling a halt. He pointed to the patrol, then held up 4 fingers. His squad understood. 20 rifles rose. Jake counted down silently, 3, 2, 1. The night erupted in controlled chaos. 20 rifles firing at 4 targets meant 5 rifles per alien. The shields flared and died within seconds. They fell without making a sound. They pushed forward, eliminating 2 more patrols with the same efficiency. Each encounter was brief and one-sided. The aliens expected plasma duels at range. They got bullet storms at close quarters. When they reached the outer wall of the base, Jake could hear the main assault beginning on the other side. The night lit up with plasma fire and the thunder of thousands of rifles. "Breach charge ready," Austin reported. Jake nodded. "Do it." The explosion blew a hole in the energy barrier. 70 soldiers poured through, rifles blazing. The defenders scrambled to respond, but they were caught between 2 attacks now. Their formations broke. Their discipline collapsed. Jake moved through the chaos like a machine. He did not think about fear or death. He thought about targets and ammunition and reload times. His rifle kicked against his shoulder again and again, sending rounds into alien shields until they broke. An officer appeared in front of him, plasma rifle raised. Jake was faster. He fired a burst that caught the alien in the chest before its shield could fully activate. The alien fell, its weapon discharging harmlessly into the ground. The battle raged for 3 hours. When the sun rose over Denver, the base was in human hands. The enemy survivors had fled toward their evacuation ships, leaving behind weapons, equipment, and over 4,000 dead. Jake sat on a piece of alien wreckage, watching the sunrise. His body was exhausted. He had fired so many rounds that his fingers were numb, and his shoulder was one massive bruise. Dropped down beside him. Her face was streaked with dirt and sweat, but she was smiling. "We took Denver," she said. Jake nodded. "Yeah, we did." Across the battlefield, human soldiers were celebrating, embracing, crying with relief. They had faced an enemy with superior technology, superior weapons, superior numbers, and they had won. The Dominion had conquered 17 species, but they had never conquered humanity. And now, perhaps for the first time in their long history of conquest, they understood what it felt like to be afraid. The war was not over yet, but the tide had turned. 3 weeks after the first alien ship landed in Arizona, Fleet Commander sent a message to Earth requesting a ceasefire. The Dominion had lost over 60% of their ground forces. Their invasion had stalled on every continent. Ships that had descended to provide air support were being shot down by human anti-aircraft weapons, their shields overwhelmed by coordinated fire just like their soldiers. What was supposed to be a simple conquest had become a nightmare. General Cooper received the ceasefire request in his command center. He read it twice, then showed it to his staff. "They want to negotiate," he said. Lieutenant Colonel Torres looked skeptical. "Could be a trap. Buy time to bring reinforcements." Shook his head. "Our satellites show their fleet is preparing to leave orbit, not calling for help. They've had enough. The negotiations were held in Geneva, in the same building where they had first demonstrated their superiority. The irony was not lost on anyone. General Cooper led the human delegation. Beside him sat military and political leaders from 12 nations. Jake was there too, standing against the wall with other soldiers who had distinguished themselves in combat, had specifically requested his presence. The delegation entered the room with none of the arrogance they had shown before. Fleet Commander walked at their head, her scales dull and her posture diminished. Behind her came a dozen advisors and guards, all of them watching the humans with wary eyes. Took her seat across from. The translator device on her chest activated, and she spoke. "The Dominion recognizes the resilience of the human species," she said. The words seemed to cost her something. "We propose an immediate end to hostilities. All forces will withdraw from your planet and your star system. In exchange, you will release our captured soldiers and allow our ship safe passage." Studied her face, trying to read alien expressions he did not fully understand. "That's it. You invaded our world, killed thousands of our people, and now you just want to leave." "We have lost more than you have," replied flatly. 42,000 soldiers dead, 17 ships destroyed. Commander, one of our greatest warriors killed by your primitive weapons." She paused. "We do not wish to lose more." Leaned back in his chair. Around him, other human leaders whispered among themselves. This was more than they had expected. The aliens were not just asking for a ceasefire. They were admitting defeat. "We accept your terms," said after a long moment, "but we want something else as well." His mandibles clicked with uncertainty. "What more could you want?" "A guarantee. The Dominion will broadcast a message to every species in your network. You will tell them that Earth is not to be touched. Any ship that enters our system without permission will be treated as hostile." Was silent for several seconds. Such a message would be humiliating. It would tell the entire galaxy that the mighty had been defeated by a species that had not even achieved faster-than-light travel. Her reputation, her fleet's reputation, would be forever diminished. But she had no choice. "Agreed," she said finally. The ceasefire documents were signed that afternoon. Within hours, soldiers around the world began marching to evacuation points. Their weapons were collected by human forces. Their wounded were returned. Their dead were left behind, buried in mass graves on the worlds they had tried to conquer. Jake watched the evacuation from a hillside outside Denver. The alien ships rose into the sky one by one, climbing toward orbit, fleeing a planet they had expected to own by now. Stood beside him, hard to believe it's over. "It's not over," Jake said quietly. "It's just beginning." He was right. The broadcast their warning to the galaxy as promised. Every species with a receiver heard the message. Humans were dangerous. Their technology was primitive, but their determination was not. They had broken the unbreakable shields. They had killed the unkillable soldiers. Some species ignored the warning. They thought they had simply been careless. They sent their own scout ships to Earth, curious about the strange creatures that had defeated an empire. Those scouts did not return. Over the following years, humanity reached the stars on their own terms. They reverse-engineered technology, combining it with their own innovations. They built ships that carried their soldiers to distant worlds, and wherever they went, they carried their weapons with them. The M4 was eventually retired, replaced by more advanced rifles with better range and penetration. But the principle remained the same: overwhelming firepower, concentrated fire, relentless pressure. The galaxy species had developed elegant weapons that fired energy beams and plasma bolts. Humans developed weapons that threw metal very fast, over and over, until nothing was left standing. It was not elegant, it was not sophisticated, but it worked. General Cooper retired 5 years after the invasion. At his retirement ceremony, He was asked to give a speech about what humanity had learned from the conflict. "The belief that technology wins wars," said. "They believe that the species with the better weapons always wins. They were wrong." He paused, looking out at the audience of soldiers and politicians. "Wars are not won by machines. They are won by people who refuse to quit, people who keep fighting even when the odds are impossible. They had better weapons, but we had something they didn't understand. We had each other." Jake was in that audience, now a colonel with his own command. Sat beside him, a major with a chest full of medals. Austin had left the military to become a teacher, telling the next generation about the war that had changed everything. After the ceremony, Jake found himself standing alone in front of a memorial wall. It listed the names of every human who had died during the invasion. There were thousands of names, each one representing a life cut short. But there were also blank spaces left on the wall. Space for more names, because humanity was still fighting. Not against but against other threats in a galaxy full of dangers. Jake placed his hand on the cold stone. He thought about Red Canyon. He thought about mocking laughter. He thought about all the people who had said humanity was doomed. They had been wrong, all of them. Humanity had entered the galactic stage not as conquerors, but as survivors. They had proven that they would not be enslaved, would not be controlled, would not bow to any species that threatened them. They had called human weapons primitive. They had laughed at the M4. They had dismissed humanity as insignificant. They were not laughing anymore. No one in the galaxy was laughing at humans anymore. Jake stepped back from the memorial and turned toward the sunset. The sky was clear and peaceful, free of alien ships for the first time in years. Somewhere out there, beyond the atmosphere, human ships were patrolling the solar system. Human soldiers were training for the next fight. Human scientists were building the next generation of weapons. The galaxy had tried to break humanity. Instead, it had made them stronger. And that was the real lesson of the invasion. That was what they and every other species would remember for generations to come. Humans were not the species in the galaxy. They were not the most advanced. They were not the most powerful. But they were the most stubborn, the most creative, the most dangerously persistent. And that, in the end, was what mattered. Jake smiled and walked away from the memorial, toward a future that humanity had earned with blood and courage, and 3,600 rounds per soldier. The war was over. The real story was just beginning.